Welcome to Libeth. I'm glad you're here. This week we are in Heian, Japan, with the Tale of Genji, written by Murasaki Shikibu. Begin by seeing the Tale of Genji not as a string of romantic disasters, but as an instrument that measures the court's emotional economy, a fine clock that ticks in the spaces between etiquette and desire, and then, minute by minute, shows us how that mechanism wears itself out. The book arranges people as roles in a system, and then watches those roles undo the system that made them legible, so that what looks like an intimate life reads finally as a map of institutions dissolving into feeling. The characters of the tale are not primarily individuals in the modern sense, each bearing a private interior that the story sets out to excavate. They are positions. Each person occupies a structural role, and the drama of the novel consists in watching what happens when the people occupying those roles feel things that those roles cannot contain. Genji is not a hero, he is a function. Murasaki is not a victim, she is a consequence. Rokujō is not a villain, she is the result of what the system does to a woman who refuses to disappear. Understanding this is the beginning of reading the book correctly. That map begins with power positioned as personal taste. Long before laws or councils pass judgment, the emperor's attention names who matters. In the opening scenes, one woman's favor makes the palace tremble, and her rise brings a rumor that what is private can become political. The emperor keeps a favorite close at hand, and his sheltering tenderness turns into a public fault line. Courtiers whisper comparisons to foreign tales of riot and fall. That sheltered devotion makes visible the court's anatomy, rank, guardianship, ceremonial precedence, and immediately reveals how personal feeling can reach inside state forms and reorder them, which is to say that power in this world lives in who is looked at and who is kept awake at night. Authority is legitimized not through written law or military strength, but through the distribution of imperial attention, and the consequences of that distribution ripple outward through every relationship in the novel. That rearrangement of loyalties depends on a peculiar refinement, Genji's refinement. The text shows him as the ideal subject: long hair, bright skin, perfect command of music and verse. But the ideal is ambidextrous. It unburdens the court of its dull duties while it centralizes attention on a person who radiates approval like a light. The emperor's appetites shift from policy to presence. Ministers begin to watch the prince's gestures the way they once watched the weather. Refinement becomes an instrument of reallocation. The more artful the subject, the more political gravity slides toward him, and what should be a cultural excellence becomes instead a centrifugal force that pulls honor and obedience away from offices and toward a personality. This is the first structural instability that Genji introduces. He does not intend it. He was made this way by a court that wanted an embodiment of its ideals. He becomes that embodiment so completely that the court begins to orbit him rather than the institutions it was designed to sustain. That force is not innocuous because talent does not sit neutrally beside birthright. It cuts at hereditary equilibrium. Genji is apprenticed into ceremonial life, then set aside into the Minamoto clan rather than elevated by blood. And that choice, half political, half protective, shows how the court tries to domesticate talent and yet cannot. When a Korean fortune teller nods and says the boy has kingly marks, but also that his reign would bring confusion, the scene makes visible the system's anxiety. A brilliant individual makes existing lineage brittle, and the presence of a single gifted body tends to reassign the future in ways institutions never intended. He is made a Minamoto not because he is less than imperial, but because he is too much so. And the court's solution to excess talent is to give it a name that places it formally outside the line of succession, while keeping it practically at the center of attention. That maneuver works for a generation. Its consequences last several. If refinement and talent begin that process, sensitivity perfects it into a method. Genji notices everything because he needs to shape moods. The book lets us see his attention as a kind of soft governance. He listens to broken phrases, collects a letter left on the roadside, times his visits to the rhythm of the palace's lamps, attends to a nurse's cough as if it were a state report. This habitual noticing is not mere tenderness. It is emotional regulation. By attending, he controls the atmosphere. And by controlling the atmosphere, he redistributes loyalty, not by coercion, but by taste. And the redistribution is permanent in ways that simple coercion never is. People coerced obey while they must. People charmed obey because they have come to want what he wants, and that is a much more durable form of control. That redistribution of loyalty is the secret weapon of charisma. When a person restructures how people feel about being in a room, institutions lose their hold. The emperor withdraws from audiences, and the court remarks that such indulgence has become dangerous to the state. Courtiers murmur that in another land, similar fixations led to riot. Those murmurs are consequence, not moralizing. They are the system realizing, too late, that allegiance has been ceded to a face and to a manner rather than to offices. Genji's charm is thus a form of public power that runs almost entirely through aesthetic excess. The court built a system that rewards the person who can generate this kind of loyalty. Genji is the person who can generate it most completely. And the court discovers, too late, that having built the system, it cannot now control the man who best embodies it. And yet that aesthetic excess is a form of narcissism disguised as cultivation. When he learns to play the lute, when he orders a festival to be more splendid than etiquette prescribes, those acts look like connoisseurship, but their structural effect is to make the prince indispensable as the kingdom's exemplar. The book lets us watch how aesthetic acts work inward. A poem becomes an assurance, a musical phrase becomes an invocation, a dance becomes a credential. His cultivation constantly folds admiration back onto himself. What looks like a life of refinement is a way to build a personal polity where loyalty is aesthetic allegiance. Genji is the court's ideal and the court's problem simultaneously, because the court's ideal, fully realized, requires a center of attention that the court's official structure cannot accommodate. When love is practiced as administration, it stops being encounter and becomes management. Genji's relations are often not meetings with people, as they are but projects he shapes. He recognizes resemblance to a lost woman and then privileges that likeness repeatedly. He lifts a child from a modest household and places her into a new life of rules and lessons so that she can grow into the role he imagines. He treats affection as a series of appointments, a calendar of meetings, and not as reciprocity between autonomous persons. Those interventions read as love written in a ledger. Gifts, tutorship, closeness. They consolidate influence by converting persons into curated sites of intimacy. His feelings are real. His method is acquisitive, and the book refuses to separate these two facts, because in the court's world, they cannot be separated. To love is to acquire is to obligate, and to obligate is to govern. Acquisition leaves a trail of emotional debris. Each person Genji acquires a girl as companion, a woman as consolation, a child as errand-waiting, amplifies his success in the short term, but fragments the social field in the long run. The text lets us track the arithmetic. An extra lover is a wound elsewhere. A favor granted in private becomes public rumor and then institutional strain. The more he attains, the less stable the world remains, because his purchases concentrate desires in his person and thereby unbalance the network of reciprocal obligations that keeps the court whole. This is the mechanism by which the novel's middle chapters turn from celebration to dissolution. The very things that made Genji magnificent in the early chapters, his beauty, his charm, his ability to accumulate loyalty, become the engines of fragmentation as the full weight of their consequences arrives. Into that environment, Murasaki appears less as a subject discovered than as an identity constructed. The scene where Genji finds the nun's child, where he brings her to his western wing and begins to teach her letters and pictures, is not just an episode of compassion. It is a deliberate act of authorship. He shapes a girl into a companion of his taste, gives her copybooks, lessons in the kodo, and toys painted to his liking. The novel stages education as emotional authorship, the process by which an adult composes a child's interior so it will mirror what he desires to encounter. There is tenderness here. The novel does not deny it. But tenderness and control are not opposites in this world. They are the same gesture read from different angles. Murasaki is beloved because she has been made to be precisely what he loves. And the question of whether she would have been this person without his shaping is a question the novel raises without answering, because in the court's world, the question itself is illegible. Everyone is what their formation made them. That composition, child as aesthetic companion, reveals a brutal logic. Cultivation is inseparable from domination. The more the pupil learns to inhabit the cultivated forms, the more she satisfies the patron's private imagination. But that satisfaction always rests on dependency. Her value depends on her successful conformity to his fantasy. The more perfectly she adapts, the more disposable she becomes to the culture that prizes novelty and contrasts. This is the paradox the book lets us feel. Interior formation is a labor of love and of control, and the success of that labor produces a fragile security. Murasaki's grief, when it arrives, is not the grief of someone who was unloved. It is the grief of someone who was loved in a way that left her no ground to stand on that was her own. Aging destabilizes the position, because elite desire runs on newness. The court's attention privileges the fresh face and the newly accomplished performance. A woman who has been perfected to a man's taste becomes, by dint of being known and expected, less exciting. The tale makes this implicit when it gathers the lovers and measures their appeal by their capacity to astonish. Murasaki is beloved and also insecure because the very structure that guarantees her place guarantees its own appetite for replacement. Security in this world is chronically provisional. It depends on continuous performance of the qualities that earned it, and continuous performance is exhausting, and exhaustion shows. The woman who was once effortlessly radiant works harder as the years pass to achieve the same effect. And the court, which does not understand why ease matters more than effort, notices that she is no longer easy. If Murasaki's fate shows the cost of adaptation, Rokujō's story exposes the cost of exclusion. She is the case the court cannot fit easily. Proud in a way that refuses to be smoothed into a pleasing softness. Her intellect and dignity are treated as destabilizing excess by a culture that wants women contained by decorum. The social response is exclusion or marginalization rather than conversation. That exclusion produces resentment, and like gunpowder under a tight lid, it presses until it detonates. What the court's refinement cannot tolerate is the woman who is too much herself, whose pride exceeds the portion allotted to her rank, whose grief refuses to take the polite, circumscribed form that etiquette requires. Rokujō is not monstrous. She is a woman whose feelings have nowhere legitimate to go. The novel dramatizes how jealousy becomes uncontainable when direct confrontation is blocked. Rokujō's anger cannot find a public outlet in a society that refuses women full speech in political arenas. Direct engagement would expose her and cost her rank. So the affect is displaced into the symbolic and then into the supernatural. Jealousy turned into possession, shadowing not merely an individual but the fabric of social life. The scene where AI is stricken and the spirit speaks through her is careful stagecraft. The haunting externalizes what the court has refused to name, the rage and effect of social silencing. Possession here is not simply supernatural plot. It is the novel's most precise analysis of what happens to emotion that cannot be expressed. It does not disappear. It finds another channel. And the channel it finds, in a world without legitimate outlets for female anger, is damage. Fujitsubo's figure folds another strain into the same pattern, but now the strain is genealogical. She resembles Genji's lost mother, and resemblance collapses the distinctions between desire, memory, and authority. The Emperor's convulsions of feeling for her are not only erotic, but also a crisis of lineage. When a beloved who looks like a parent becomes the object of desire, the categories of filial relation and sovereign succession destabilize each other. The secret child that emerges from that forbidden relationship is not merely a private scandal. It becomes a hidden succession crisis that contaminates the very legitimacy of the throne. Political dissent now hides transgression. A hidden heir sits at the center of the imperial line, and the knowledge of that secret connects Genji and Fujitsubo in a bond that cannot be acknowledged, that can only be maintained through the careful performance of ignorance and indifference, year after year, at court. That contamination matters because legitimacy in this society runs on visible genealogies and ritual purity. When desire enters the imperial line, the sacred center accepts a pollutant from within. The Tale of Genji lets desire do more than disturb intimacies. It shows desire entering institutions and altering their internal logic. An heir born in secrecy carries the future inside a concealment. Embedded desire becomes a structural variable in politics, and politics must then accommodate a secret it never intended. And the secret is perfectly contained. No one is punished. No scandal erupts, precisely because the court system of indirection and aesthetic management is so well developed that it can carry almost any weight of concealment without visibly straining. That is both impressive and horrifying. AI's marriage embodies the institutional face of all these complications. She has the correct name, the proper rank, and an office-like position within a ceremonial world that values order. But that correctness cannot produce intimacy. The novel gives us a long, patient look at a union that functions administratively rather than personally. Marriage becomes management of alliances and names. The emotional life of marriage is a missing ledger item, and when resentment grows in that absence, it works symbolically, tearing at order rather than at simple preference. She is the wife the court required Genji to have. She is also, in some quiet way, his mirror, both of them doing their formal duty in a structure that was never designed to produce the kind of connection either of them needs. Her death, engineered through Rokujō's displaced anger, is the court's logic completing a circuit that the court never consciously designed. Kaoru, who arrives in the Uji chapters as the next generation's central figure, is the inheritance made flesh. He is not Genji's biological son, born of his wife's affair, Genji's karma mirrored in the most precise possible way, and yet he has grown up inside Genji's world, formed by its assumptions and its residues. What he inherits is not power, but a set of unsolvable problems. A charismatic ideal he cannot match, a set of obligations he did not incur, and a sensitivity that has curdled into melancholy because the world it was trained to navigate no longer exists in its original form. Kaoru's caution is the structural consequence of Genji's carelessness. His inability to act with confidence is the psychological inheritance of a generation that burned through its confidence and left behind only its anxieties. Ukifune is the novel's final and most radical character precisely because she refuses the structure that all the others inhabit. She is a woman competed over by men who see in her a reflection of something they are seeking. She is, in the book's terms, the latest in a long series of women who are desired as ideals rather than encountered as persons. What makes her different is that she survives the process of being a desired object. She survives it literally, pulling back from the edge of self-destruction, and then refuses to re-enter the circuit that would define her again. She takes religious vows, she retreats, she refuses to be retrieved when Kaoru comes looking. Her refusal is not peace. It is not healing in any consoling sense. It is simply the recognition that the system she was formed in has nothing to offer her that would not repeat its own damage, and the choice to stop rather than continue. The court has no grammar for this. The novel ends with it unresolved, because the refusal to be resolved is the only thing Ukifune can do that genuinely belongs to her. So the Tale of Genji resolves nothing in a plot sense. It is a meditation in action. Each episode reveals a pattern. Each person functions as an articulator of a social dynamic, and the narrative keeps letting these dynamics press against one another until the strains show. Power is mapped through attention. Refinement becomes governance. Cultivation doubles as domination. Jealousy returns in displaced modes. Desire enters institutions and makes them speak in different tongues. The book refuses closure because the patterns it reveals are not resolved by single events. They are structural tensions that persist across generations, and the only thing the tale does is make their work visible. Every character is the court thinking. Every relationship is the court feeling. And what the court produces, through all its feeling and all its thinking, is loneliness. Precise, well-furnished, impeccably maintained loneliness in every room of the palace, behind every screen. That's all for today on Libeth. If you want to follow the whole journey, subscribe. One new book every week. At least we try.